Okay. Okay, so next section, Tanren Kiso, which is body conditioning basics. So Tanren Kiso means the basics of training skills of the body. So this is our various kinds of strength, explosive strength, particularly for Matsubayashiryu, but also the strength in our stances, stability, and our structure. So what I want to do is take you through just a little bit of the way that I do Tanren Kiso. It's not exactly the same, for example, even as my teacher, Arikaki Sensei, does it. But what I've done is to take certain things a little bit further based on training methods that I've seen across various styles in Okinawan. But the basic template is the Matsubayashiryu pattern for Tanren Kiso. Okay, so we're going to run through that. Right, Tanren Kiso, Kyotsuke. Right, Jayoi, going to keep it up. Yeah. Okay, and hands on rest. First section is Ashibarai. Okay, so from here, ich, ni, san, shi, wo, rok, shich, ach, kyu, ju. So from this Naihanchi stance, I really want to keep my balance and my weight in the center as much as possible. When I'm doing this, I'm trying to minimize shifting my weight left and right. Yeah, so this kind of thing, yeah, I want to minimize. I want to be keeping my center controlled, sweeping as much as possible, holding my center there. Okay. Next step is stretching out laterally to the sides of the arms. So just turn my feet out a little bit, yeah, to ich, ni, san, shi, wo, rok, shich, ach, kyu, ju. So I'm allowing my joints to stretch and then come back naturally, using the natural elasticity in the joints. Yeah? So at the moment, the body's not really engaged. I'm just using this as an exercise to stretch the connective tissue, my shoulder joints, and my elbow joints, and my wrist joints. So 1, 2, 3. So in a relaxed fashion. 7, 8, 9, 10. Really want to let that stretching come back. Okay. So that's the way that I've been taught in Matsubayashiryu. The next sequence is moving forwards. Yeah. And essentially doing the same thing, allowing the wrists to stretch forward so that almost like an iraki or back fist type position. Ich, ni, san, si, wo, rok, shich, ach, kyu, ju. And again, you can see at the moment the body is only minimally engaged, and I'm just using my arm power muscle. Okay, the third one, moving from a cross position down to sort of a Geidan Barai, Yoko Geidan Barai, or sideways Geidan Barai position. Ich, ni, san, shi, wo, rok, shich, ach, kyu, ju. Make sure we get that stretch out there before coming back. Okay, so we can use that same framework, those last 3 exercises, and really engage the hips and the center and the core to really work on our power generation from our hips, which primarily rotate, and our spine and body, which primarily moves forwards and backwards. Yeah? So what I'm going to do now is initiate the movement from the hips. So while I'm going to still go back and do this lateral movement, I'm going to do each one initiating from the right or the left hip. So alternately, starting the movement from the hip. Okay. So ich, ni, san, shi, wo, rok, shich, ach, kyu, ju. So I'm working this hip rotation. The hands are really just there to give me that extension of movement power. Okay, so that's lateral hip rotation. If your stance is too wide, the wider your stance, the more it will restrict your hip rotation. And so actually this should be, like I said, kind of that fairly high Naihanchi parallel stance that we use in Matsubayashiryu. Okay, the next one, we're going to roll forward. Now we want to start the movement from the hip girdle. Right? The hip girdle naturally rotates up and forwards and back and down. up and forwards and back and back. So this is where I'm going to start my movement. Ich, ni, san, shi, wo, rok, shich, hach, kyu, ju. Good. So the movement, I'll just turn to the side. The movement's starting here, but it's actually going to be a wave of movement that moves up the spine, and it's expressed through the upper body. Yeah, from here. Yeah, so it's a wave of movement that works up through my spine, and this is why I need to have that flexibility in my spine, right? I want to keep that relaxation so that my hip movement comes through as a wave of movement from my hips up through my spine, but the hips rotate up and then back, up and back. Okay, so the next one is laterally or diagonally down. Yeah? So this now is a combination of dropping the hip and twisting, right? Just as we would do to go into a gate out below type position. Yeah? But here we're just going to work the framework and drop and pull alternately with right, left hips. Yeah? So I want to work on synchronizing that movement and use that to pull the elbow in and then follow that energy out. Right? This is actually very similar to what Tanren Sensei teaches in terms of this. From here, he would do it in a Zen Kutsudachi and going through, yeah, here, yeah, this kind of very snappy movement to get under that. And we're going to do it back in this framework. Okay, so we bring hands together and then alternate right and left. Okay, ich, ni, san, shi, wo, rok, shich, hach, kyu, ju. Okay. So the hip is actually moving forward and then back and down. Forward and then back and down. Right. Look at the side. It moves forward and then back and down. This one comes forward, back and down. Yeah? Forward, back and down. Right? So it's a forward and then back and down. Right? I want to use that coordinated with dropping my right. So this is using the lateral movement, combining it with this dropping my right, using gravity and my stretch. Okay, good. All right, let's continue on through Tanren Kiso. Okay, next movement, going into, again, Kibarachi and Morojuken. All right, ich, ni, san, shi, wo, rok, shich, hach, kyu, ju. Right? So from here, again, primarily looks like a exercise of moving the arms, but actually I want to engage my core as well. So this is quite subtle, yeah, it's not big, right? But from here, using right and left, just as I did before. Ich, ni, san, shi, wo. And the other point is that I don't want to pull this back in close, right? I want this to be extended approximately so the elbow is at 90 degrees. That will put my fists right in front of my shoulders. Yeah? And my arms are relaxed. So because my arms are relaxed, I'm using the weight in my fists to propel, or in fact to sort of drag my arms forward. Right? So this is like dropping the weight. It should feel not like moving an iron bar. Yeah, it should feel like dropping a weight that's kind of connected to the end, to the outside. Yeah? So essentially you let the weight of the hands do a lot of the work. Ich, ni, san, shi, wo, rok, shich, hach, kyu, ju. Good, and one down to get down. So this one stays where it is. Shoulder height, shoulder width. Now I'm going to think about covering my center line. So again, the hips are engaged. My right hip's coming forward. In fact, right hip's coming forward and then going to pull it back. Left hip forward, going to pull it back. Ich, ni, san, shi. And we're still on that heavy hands dropping feeling. Walk, rock, shich, hach, kyu, ju. Good. So once you've got this one kind of working, yeah, make sure that this one's working too, right? This one should be hitting down and forward. Imagine that you're hitting somebody in the groin. Here, 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 here. So both hands are both covering, but also potentially striking as well. Hitch, knee, san, shi, go, go, hitch, touch, two, two. Okay, good. Let's go to my hanchi position. So this is called Masazuki. Okay. So I'm going to rotate the upper body. We're trying to keep the base as stable as possible. We want to try to avoid collapsing that rear leg, right? Try and maintain that. Yeah. Maintain that structure, this structure here. Yeah. Okay. So when we pivot, we're primarily pivoting now in the torso, not the hips. Pivoting in the torso. Yeah. Pivot hips, it will drag your leg with it. Itch, knee, san, shi, go, go, chich, touch, cue, cue. Good. It's good to do that as a relaxed movement first, okay? So that you learn to control your lower structure. And then next we're going to put some snap into it. We'll do that not by thinking about punching with this hand, but by pulling with this elbow. If I pull, yeah, pull, right? That's pulling my shoulders around, pivoting around here, yeah, and then catapult the other hand forward. And I keep this hand close to my body, right? I don't want it flailing out here. Right? It's just losing energy and speed. I want to go close. Right? So pulling with that elbow, which is connected to that hip. Itch, knee, san, shi, go, go, chich, touch, cue, chu. Now, some of you might be saying, but you said don't move the hips. Well, yes, I did say that, but you can initiate a movement from the hips, but not allow the stance to twist and get broken. Right, so I initiate, but then I use the elasticity in my torso to put the snap in, and also then to build up the potential energy when I go back the other way. Right, so imagine that your torso is like a car spring, yeah? Car spring, right? Just with a twist, with an opposite twist, upper and lower going in opposite directions, there's a lot of energy stored in the spring. When you let it go, boom, it will come back to its center. This is our center, this is our zero here, yeah? So if I load up the spring, then there's energy coming back. But now I load up the other way. Right? So I'm using that, I'm going to use that natural elasticity, which is built into my torso. Okay. From there, I like to go to guard position. Okay. This is not one that Arakaki Sensei does, but it is similar to something to training in Makishi Dojo, for example. So from here, jab, jab, just short jab. So imagine a guard, keep those elbows in, right? We don't want them flaring out. So this is pretty similar to sort of a Sanchin position now. Yeah, if you know your Gojuryu or your Nahate, then this is kind of a Sanchin hand position, right? Yeah, my feet are still level, as in my hanchi, but here I want this hourglass shape, right? I don't want these going. Okay, from here, jab, 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 and come back, and I'm coming back to my guard position. Itch, knee, san, shi, go, go, chich, touch, cue, chu. Good. Again, this is starting in the hip. This is not unlike what we were doing earlier. Not unlike that, right? Okay, from there, yeah, I'll throw in some variations usually. So this was jabbing, straight jabbing. Next one's going to be uraki. Okay, same movement. Itch, knee, san, shi, go, go, chich, touch, cue, chu. Okay, good. And then shote. So essentially a palm strike, right? Itch, knee, san, shi, go, go, chich, touch, cue, chu. Okay. Okay, and from there, we'll come up, finish. Okay. So that's the section where we're kind of basically working the Naihanchi stance and body dynamics based around that stance. Okay, next position, shuto. Right, shuto, okay. So we're just going to work the hands, itch, knee, san, shi, go, rock, chich, touch, cue, ju. Good. Outside. Ich, ni, san, shi, go, rock, chich, touch, cue, ju. Good. So hopefully you notice the same two principles that we talked about earlier on in the earlier section, yeah? Which is that the movement is actually initiated from the hip. My hip is dropping forward and then pulling back and out, which is pulling my hand. And then I want to keep this hand relatively relaxed so that I get the heavy hand energy coming through in the shuto. So imagining that the shuto is either being used to sort of lock inside the arm, maybe against the bicep, for example, yeah, or that I'm dropping it onto the carotid, so onto the side of the neck. That's more of an aggressive attacking move. Either way, I want this heavy striking. Yeah, I want that loose, heavy striking, right? This one, right? Okay, so we're going to try and generate that feeling, which is movement coming from here, but going up through a framework with loose tension. Right, again, from the hip. Ich, ni, san, shi, go, rock, chich, touch, cue, ju. Right? Other side. Ich, ni, san, shi, go, rock, chich, touch, cue, ju. So one more point to highlight there is that the shuto, the initial movement of shuto is actually a nuke movement, right? So when I am flexing and pulling in here, and dropping that hip down into the center, this is my uchi-uki cover. So this is a functional part of the uke movement. Then I come back with whiplash. So this should not be neglected or overlooked. Yeah, this uchi-uke, this is a very important, maybe the first functional part of shuto-uke movement. Okay, next one, haito-uke. Again, from hands, ich, ni, san, shi, go, rock, chich, touch, cue, ju. Okay, inside. So we're hitting with the inside of the knuckle here. So this is commonly kind of known as the clothesline, but we're going reverse. Ich, ni, san, shi, go, rock, chich, touch, cue, ju. We're good. And again, I want to employ the same principles of movement in this as I did in the previous sections. In other words, I want that movement initiated from the hip. So the hip is the motor of the movement, both the pulling in, the softer phase, and then dropping the hand in to hit with the ridge. I also want this hand to use that same heavy energy, right? So I don't want this to be very, very rigid. Again, it's not an iron bar. Think of it more as a ball and chain. Then I want to drop the ball onto the target. In this case, though, it's the ridge, right? So in our kata, we can see applications of this as being essentially osai-uke, or suppressing the other person's hand or guard, or coming in and hitting into targets, generally at the side of the neck or the side of the head, or perhaps in the back of the head, depending on the angle of the cutting. Right, so now we're going to put that movement and snap and a little bit of that heavy hand into the movement, right? Move more from the hips. Ich, ni, san, shi, go, rock, chich, touch, cue, ju. Right. Side. Ich, ni, san, shi, go, rock, chich, touch, cue, ju. Right. Okay, so generally then, when we finish this section, we do so with punches, and kicking practice. So we'll take a break there, and we'll do that second section following.